Hello and welcome. If you're here, you're on Module 4, which is fantastic. You're doing great work, so let's keep that momentum going as we dive into building cultural competency, especially when it comes to Indigenous relations. This is a really important conversation about history, respect, and, well, our shared future. So let's get into it.
Okay, so first up, we're jumping right into a debate that is pretty much impossible to miss these days. You see it everywhere, from social media threads to high-fashion runways. We're talking about that tricky line between appreciating a culture and appropriating it. It's a really complex and, often very passionate conversation.
And this is the question that's at the absolute heart of it all. When does genuine inspiration cross over and become harmful exploitation? It's not always a simple answer, so to even begin to understand it, we've got to look at the powerful arguments on both sides. So on one hand, you have the argument against appropriation. The core idea here is that it's really about power dynamics. It's when a dominant culture takes something sacred or deeply meaningful from another culture and, well, waters it down, turning it into a costume or a trend. But on the other hand, some people worry that the conversation goes too far. They argue it can put up walls, stifle creativity and the natural flow of ideas between cultures, and maybe even create more division.
And believe me, this isn't just some abstract theory. We see this playing out all the time. Think about the controversies over sports mascots that just lean into old stereotypes. Or when a huge fashion house like Gucci uses sacred items like Sikh turbans as just another accessory. The big issue, really, is always about context and meaning. For example, a war bonnet isn't just a cool feathered headdress. It's an item of immense spiritual significance that has to be earned through specific actions and honors. And that right there, that's where the real harm can happen.
This quote just nails it, doesn't it? It really gets to the heart of the damage. It is all about the loss of meaning. When an object with deep spiritual history becomes a disposable fashion trend, its original importance gets completely erased for most people. And this isn't just, a simple insult. It connects to a much, much deeper and more painful history. So to really understand why this stuff cuts so deep, we have to go back in time. We need to look at a period where destroying culture wasn't just an unfortunate side effect. It was the actual stated goal of government policy. Just take a moment to absorb those words. These were spoken by Canada's very first Prime Minister in the House of Commons. There's zero ambiguity here, is there? The intention of the residential school system was laid out plain as day to sever the bond between Indigenous children and their families, their communities, their entire world. This picture here shows one of those schools. For over 100 years, more than 150,000 First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children were forced into institutions that looked just like this. They were torn from their homes, not simply for an education, but to be completely and fundamentally remade. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada didn't mince words. They called this a policy of cultural genocide. And when you look at the tactics, it's easy to see why. The spiritual practices were literally outlawed. Children were beaten for speaking their own mother tongue. The government's stated goal was total assimilation, to absorb Indigenous peoples until their unique cultures simply ceased to exist. Now, this policy of cultural erasure, it didn't just happen in a vacuum. No, it was a crucial tool in a much bigger colonial project. A project designed from the ground up to dispossess Indigenous peoples of their land and their resources. I think this is such a powerful way to look at the problem. When we see things like disparities in health outcomes or income today, we're often just looking at the leaves on the tree. But the real cause isn't in the leaves. It's down in the roots, in those deep historical structures of colonialism that are still feeding the present. And this is absolutely key. Colonialism isn't just something that happened a long time ago. It's an ongoing process. It's about taking land, imposing control from the outside, and then creating an ideology of superiority to justify the whole thing. And that process has completely reshaped every single aspect of Indigenous life. At the very heart of this whole process was a massive clash in how people saw the world. For settlers arriving under government policies, they looked out and saw land that seemed empty, unused, and, up for grabs. But for countless Indigenous nations, that exact same land was everything. It was their home, their grocery store, their pharmacy, their church. It was the center of their entire universe.
And this number, wow. This number shows the absolutely devastating result of that conflict. 65%. Think about that. In less than 50 years, because of just one law in the US,
Indigenous peoples lost almost 2/3 of their land base. That is a staggering amount of dispossession, and the consequences of that are still echoing today.
But this painful history of erasure and dispossession, it is not the end of the story, not by a long shot. Today, we're seeing these incredibly powerful movements that are all about healing, reclaiming what was lost, and building a new, more just relationship for the future.
This is such a critical way to reframe the idea of reconciliation. It's not about fixing an Indigenous problem. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was really clear about this. It is a Canadian problem. It's a shared responsibility for every single person to help repair a relationship that colonialism broke. And that repair has to be built on a foundation of mutual respect.
So what does that repair actually look like? Well, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, often just called UNDRP, gives us a kind of roadmap. It affirms the basic rights of Indigenous peoples to their cultures, their right to determine their own futures, and their right to govern themselves through their own institutions. Literally the very things that colonial policies tried so hard to destroy.
And this framework is fueling some incredible movements today. We're seeing this amazing cultural resurgence, an active, vibrant revitalization of Indigenous languages, ceremonies, and knowledge systems. And right alongside that is a growing call for land restitution, which you've probably heard of as the Land Back movement.
Now, this quote helps clear up a really common misunderstanding about land back. It's not about kicking people out of their homes. It's about returning stewardship and the power to make decisions over public lands back to Indigenous nations. It's a shift from seeing land as a private thing to buy and sell to seeing it as a collective responsibility. It directly challenges the whole mindset that created the problem in the first place. I really wanted to end this section with this incredibly moving statement from Maxine Lecorne. She was a youth witness at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Her message isn't one of victimhood. It's one of profound strength, incredible resilience, and survival. Despite a systematic, generations-long attempt to erase their very existence, Indigenous peoples are still here.
And that brings us to our final question, which is really a question for every single one of us. Understanding all this history, it isn't just an academic exercise. It kind of demands that we think about our own role right here, right now. Reconciliation isn't a one-time event. It's a process, a path that we all have to walk together. So that question remains for us to answer. What is our shared path forward?